Okay, it is now exactly 14 o'clock here in Brussels. And since we have a fully packed program, we should start right away. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this workshop on Polar Copernicus. My name is Maria Bardal, and I work with the Polar File here at the Directorate General for Defense Industry and Space in the Earth Observation Unit. Together with colleagues from the unit and Mercator Ocean and ECMWF, I will guide you through these 2 afternoons of fully packed Polar Copernicus information. During the workshop, we will use Slido for questions and comments. You should see the code on screen now. Please note that not all questions will be showed to the public. The moderators will be choosing the most relevant questions and then display them to everybody. We will also launch some Slido polls during the workshop for you to answer. The first one is being launched now. Please note that the main session of this meeting is being recorded. So let's get this workshop started. I will give the floor to Mauro Facchini, Head of Unit for the Earth Observation Unit here at DEFIS, to formally open the workshop.
Yes, thank you very much, Maria. I hope that you can hear me well as the other colleagues. It's really a pleasure to be with you here this afternoon. So good afternoon to everyone. I think it's very important to have this workshop on Copernicus Polar, and the polar regions are getting more and more impact and interest in the last years. The first of the reasons is that the polar regions are at the forefront for climate change, and we have already witnessed some situations during the last summer, but also before, a lot of heat waves in the polar cycle, increasing number of wildfires, and as well known, the sea ice coverage that is hitting minimum records. It's a very remote and harsh environment, and this makes satellite data perfectly fit to monitor this area and its changes. And the Copernicus Sentinels represent a unique asset that could really be used in this respect. It's not just about environment. The Arctic is also a region of strong geopolitical interest, and it's very important how it changed also from the political reasons, but also economic reasons. And good international cooperation is essential to take the actions needed to minimize the long-term effects of climate change and support adaptation effects in the region. In this respect, we also cooperate with some third parties to cooperate in that area, and we have also just signed a collaboration agreement with Canada, where exchanging data on polar region was one of the main topics. In a nutshell, a safe, stable, sustainable, peaceful, and prosperous Arctic is important not just for the Arctic itself, but for the EU, and not only the EU, but I think for the whole world. And the EU updated its Arctic policy last year because we really think that this is the main objective. And this Arctic policy will be presented by DG Mare representative later during this workshop. The Arctic was also in general recognized by the Council conclusions on Copernicus at the Horizon 2035 as an important policy area where data from current and future sentinels plays a major role. 6 Copernicus services are already generating data, and some of them are also relevant for the polar regions, and this will also presented through by several colleagues during these 2 days. So this workshop will give you an overview of the issues related to climate change in the polar regions that satellites can help us monitor, how Copernicus data and products can contribute to facilitating life in the Arctic, and will showcase examples on economic activities in the Arctic that are benefiting from Copernicus data and services. We'll get also a glimpse into the future, so not just what has been done up to now, but what are also the plans for the future. I know that many of you are connected, so I really trust that this workshop will be very fruitful. And before diving into the program, I'd like to stress that the success of the workshop will be depending greatly from your active participation. So despite the fact that the meeting is virtual, we really count very much on you being active. As Maria mentioned, there are also IT tools for that. So please write your questions and comments in the chat and have a look at the slide of questions. So again, your input will be of paramount importance. Before giving the floor to the next ones, I would really like to thank all those that were behind the organization of this workshop. Maria Viasin, Attilio, all the colleagues, and indeed all the communication unit that was behind that. So with that, I conclude my intervention and I wish you a very fruitful workshop. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mauro. Our next introduction comes from Jose Miguel Roncero Martin from DG Mare. He's an international relations officer in the unit responsible for the implementation of the EU Arctic policy. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everyone. And I said afternoon, knowing that some people might be listening from other different time zones. Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much to DigiDefis for organizing this event and for giving DigiMare the possibility also to participate in the introduction. For those of you that might be asking themselves right now, why is a person from DigiMare participating in the introduction? Is because, well, the Arctic as a policy file is led by DigiMare. But as we can see, we will see in my short introduction, DigiDefis and Copernicus are a very, very strong, important pillar in the EU's Arctic policy. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Why does the EU have a policy for the Arctic? Basically because the EU is in the Arctic and the Arctic is in the EU. We have here a map where we can see the upper part, the European Arctic region, where we have 3 EU member states, so Sweden, Finland, and the Kingdom of Denmark, which is in the Arctic through Greenland and the Faroe Islands, which are Arctic states. And we also have two countries that are members of the European Economic Area, Iceland and Norway. So we have basically the whole of the European Arctic is related to the European Union one way or another, either as being part of the EU or as being part of the European Economic Area or different agreements where the European Union is at the center. At the same time, this is not only about maps or countries. We have hundreds of thousands of EU citizens that live in the Arctic that are also there on the daily basis. These are not, researchers, explorers. These are people who live either in Rovaniemi or in Uppsala or in moving outside the European Union. They could live in Tromsø or in Reykjavik or in Ilulissat. So these people are or can be or might be often are EU citizens. And we have hundreds of thousands of people living there who are also EU citizens. But at the same time, we have as EU strategic and day-to-day interests, responsibilities, and presence. We have a responsibility towards the Arctic, towards the region as a whole, because the EU has been one of the, historically major pollutants. Now our CO2 emissions are falling comparatively, to other regions like North America or Asia. But we have this historical responsibility that we have acknowledged in our strategy and the EU Arctic policy that was published, updated last year. And at the same time, the Arctic is very important for the EU in terms of food, in terms of raw materials, and so on. So there are these strategic and day-to-day interests. Next slide, please. And as Mauro mentioned, the Arctic is changing and is changing due to climate change. This is quite obvious. We have here a Copernicus product illustrating the mean sea ice concentration and the difference in only 8 years. And we can see how it's really, going down. But it's not only climate change, it's also environmental degradation from different pollutants, from oil spills, from different human actions. Pollution, black carbon, persistent organic pollutants, you name it. This is affecting biodiversity, not only in the Arctic. This is affecting biodiversity all over the world, but in the Arctic, this is measurable and this is very, very tangible. It's happening, and people living there have observed this already, going back several years. Um, the Arctic is also changing in the sense of development and the need to put sustainable development in the front of the agenda before any type of development that might be driven by extractive industries, mostly hydrocarbons. And as well as Mauro also mentioned, the Arctic is the front line of research in many areas, from climate change to some adaptation, food production. And last but not least, and sadly also these days, geopolitics plays a really important role in the Arctic, driven by, well, things, events happening elsewhere, like the Russian invasion on Ukraine that affected Arctic cooperation in the Arctic Council, on the auspices of the Arctic Council, but also the interest of actors outside the region, like could be China, could be India, could be Singapore, for different reasons. But they are eyeing the Arctic, and they have an increasing interest in the Arctic. Next slide, please. So in 2021, in October, we updated our Arctic policy, and it's an update. So the EU has had a policy for the Arctic since 2008, and was updated in 2012 and 16, and again in 2021, due to all these changes that we mentioned before. And we have three main pillars for our Arctic policy. We want the Arctic to be a peaceful area, where peaceful, stable, safe, where dialogue and cooperation are the key. We want to work with Arctic partners and the Arctic states to address the ecological, social, economic, and political challenges. And we want to foster inclusive and sustainable development to the benefit of the Arctic, those who live there, and future generations. Next slide, please. On this one, I just want to mention that we are working with local stakeholders. We are working with Arctic stakeholders that are working in the Arctic, on the Arctic, but might not be Arctic by themselves. We are focusing on the feedback, inputs from local communities and indigenous peoples. We are working on climate change, pollution, hydrocarbons. We are working on civilian safety, on research and innovation, and geopolitics. And next slide, please. All these areas where we are working on, or where the EU Arctic policy, the 21 update is working on, are really tackled one way or another by Copernicus. And you can see here that, civilian safety, we have emergencies and disaster, Copernicus Emergency Management Service, one service that I know very, very well because I was working at the ERCC, the Emergency Response Coordination Center of the European Union before. But we also have Copernicus working on anything related to climate change, anything related to ice, to the oceans, to forests, to land, how is it used, to emissions. So Copernicus plays a very important role. The 5 services that we have listed here help the EU develop and implement its work in the Arctic and for the Arctic. And next slide, please. And with this one, I finish. These are 3 specific actions that, in the EU Arctic policy, the 2021 update, Copernicus will, help develop and implement this policy by working in these actions. And I think it's important to mention them. In any case, they are in the updated EU Arctic policy. But those are a Copernicus Arctic thematic hub, a one-stop shop for all Copernicus Arctic products, and enhancing CMES MS to improve to address more Arctic Ocean needs, as well as Arctic component in other services. So on this one, next slide, please, is the end of my presentation in any case, but I just want to highlight that Copernicus is an essential part of the EU Arctic policy, not only in the conception, but also in implementation. And as we move forward in the next years, implementing the different activities, we know that Copernicus is going to be either an enabler, facilitating other activities, or is going to be a deliver by itself. The program is going to deliver tangible results that the EU is promoting in the Arctic and for the Arctic. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Miguel. Um, Now we will hear from the Knowledge Center for Earth Observation, which is operated by the Joint Research Center in collaboration with the Earth Observation Unit at DG DEFIS. So, Richard Gilmore from DEFIS, please, yes, you're already on stage. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Maria. Just checking my phone is. Yeah, so my name's Richard Gilmore from DG DEFIS, from the Earth Observation Unit. So the aim of this presentation is to give a short overview of two new tools recently adopted by the Copernicus program to ensure that its services and products best serve the needs of EU policies, such as those just outlined by my colleague Miguel. So the first of these is the Knowledge Center on Earth Observation, or the KCO for short. The KCO launched in 2021, and first work effectively started in 2022. The initiative is co-led by DEFIS and JRC, and also directly involves around 20 policy DGs having an interest in Earth observation products. So what are the main aims of the KCO? Well, there are two. The first is to raise awareness inside the Commission of the Copernicus offering. And the second is to gather and understand the needs of the policy DGs to provide analysis and feedback on ways to improve Copernicus to best serve these needs. So a few words about the working methodology and the outputs that can be expected from the KCO. So the KCO is principally based on a process of working groups, with each working group focused on a specific policy area. This process is referred to as policy deep dive assessment. The main output of this will be recommendations on ways to improve the current Copernicus product portfolio. In particular, it will help to translate the policy needs into a set of requirements. In addition, it will identify any gaps that need to be addressed through research and development and make recommendations on priority areas to be addressed through the Horizon program. So what is the current status of the KCO? Well, the first policy deep dive was started at the beginning of this year. Biodiversity was chosen for this first policy deep dive. This topic was selected as it was identified as the one having the broadest impact across the Commission. It was therefore seen as a good starting point for the process. Biodiversity is, of course, also of interest for the polar community, and I would like to take this opportunity to announce that a workshop will be organized on the 16th of November. The workshop will inform the broader community of stakeholders about the findings of this deep dive and gather further input. After this initial deep dive on biodiversity, it is expected that the KCO will have the capacity to run about 4 policy deep dives per year. One of the next tasks for the KCO will therefore be to define the highest priority policy areas for the next set of policy deep dives over the next couple of years. This list of top priorities has not yet been finalized, but it is expected that the polar Arctic topic will be shortlisted to be addressed within the 2023-2024 timeframe. The polar and Arctic topic is, of course, being strongly supported by DG MARI, as we just heard. And it is also clear that there is a broad impact and interest across many policy DGs, including MARI, CLIMA, RTD, and European External Action Service, as well as other DGs such as Connect, Trade, Move, Recho, and Grow. So just to finish this short presentation on the KCO, a couple of other important points I would like to highlight. As you will have understood, the work of the KCO is principally internal to the Commission, but it will comprise steps to inform and involve in external stakeholders. In particular, it will involve the interested entities, but also the broader community, as, for example, the biodiversity workshop to be held on 16th of November that I just mentioned. The KCO is a new instrument, but it does not replace the existing methodologies for the promotion of user uptake. Its work will be complementary to existing user uptake mechanisms, such as the work of the User Forum, the Copernicus Academy, the Copernicus Relays, the FP Cup project, and USPA's support for uptake in the downstream sector. So that completes what I wanted to say about the Knowledge Center for Earth Observation. I'd like to just very quickly mention a second new instrument, which is the thematic hub, briefly touched upon in the previous presentation. So in a nutshell, a thematic hub is a tool embedded within the Copernicus services themselves. The aim of a thematic hub is to create a specific entry point for the Copernicus users working in a specific policy area so that they can easily access all Copernicus products relating to that policy area. This should bring together products from several services into one easy to access place. Thematic hubs are selected based on high priority policy areas, but also take into account the maturity of the corresponding product portfolio and the capacity of the Copernicus services to take on this additional task. We also have to take into consideration budget availability. A given thematic hub will be coordinated by a designated Copernicus service, in principle the service having the most relevant product in its portfolio, and will be supported by all other services having relevant products to offer. So far, we have initiated 4 such thematic hubs. So coastal zones, which is coordinated by the Marine Service, health coordinated by the Atmosphere Service, energy coordinated by the Climate Change Service, and last but not least, actually as of last Friday, the Arctic Thematic Hub was formally launched. This will be coordinated by the Marine Service, which will also work closely with the Arctic Passion Project and the Polar Task Force to define the scope of the Thematic Hub. So this completes what I wanted to present today, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Richard, for that overview and also for the last announcements. Okay, so for the last introductory talk, I will make an attempt to provide an overview of the current service portfolio and activities in Copernicus relevant for the polar regions, and I will try to do this in 10 minutes. That's why I will only list the products here, but during the workshop, several of the services will be presented in more depth. I will not present the Copernicus space segment specifically, so I want to emphasize now that Sentinel data, of course, play an essential role in the products and projects mentioned, and also that all the flying Sentinels, the Copernicus satellites, have further polar applications. Next slide. So I also included a slide of the Copernicus role in the EU Arctic policy, but of course, Miguel presented that already. So let's just skip to the next slide of the Copernicus services and the current service portfolio. Next slide. So the Marine Service has more polar products than I'll be able to present here, even if I dedicated the full 10 minutes. But in general terms, the Marine Service provides real-time observations through the Sea Ice Thematic Assembly Center and have both an Arctic and Baltic monitoring and forecasting center. The service is divided into the components blue, white, and green ocean and offers 8 different sea ice products as part of the White Ocean. These products and more information on specific products are listed in the extra slides of this presentation, which you can download later. The service also offers products related to biogeochemistry transparency, such as turbidity and planktons, as part of the green ocean. Ocean wave products, such as significant height, direction, and wind waves, and more. And ocean physics products, including but not limited to temperature and salinity in the blue ocean segment. These products are important for safety at sea and coastal services in the Arctic, and also offers fishing and aquaculture support. The Marine Service also publishes the State of the Ocean report yearly, which we see some graphics from to the right. Next slide. Moving to the Global Land Service, which offers 3 types of specific thematically high polar relevance, being lake ice extent, snow cover extent, and snow water equivalent, and also several near real-time products with partially or full coverage in polar regions, the normalized difference vegetation index, leaf area index, fraction of absorbed photosynthetic active radiation, the FAPAR, the fraction of vegetation cover, dry matter productivity, burnt areas, and the soil water index. The Pan-European Land Service offers high-resolution snow and ice products up to 66 degrees, so covering parts of Scandinavia and Iceland. And many of these products will be covered in a later talk today. Next slide. The Copernicus Climate Change Service produces several essential climate variables products based on satellite data of high relevance in the polar regions. Being clustered into groups here, we have the atmospheric variables, chemistry of the atmosphere, hydrospheric variables, cryospheric variables, biophysical variables, ocean variables, and also the ocean ECVs. In addition, the service offers reanalysis globally and also regionally for the Arctic. The C3S also publishes the European State of the Climate report once a year, which includes somewhat depressing Arctic section. Next slide. The Atmosphere Monitoring Service provides the following products applicable for the polar regions: monitoring and forecast of the ozone layer and of ozone hole events in both poles, monitoring of trends and anomalies for the atmospheric constituents in polar regions, wildfire activity and wildfire emissions, which we see an illustration of here, transport of aerosol, particularly black carbon, and to a certain degree monitoring on methane concentrations and estimation of emissions. The methane information products provided are currently essentially for modeling due to difficulties of observations at high latitudes by satellite. Then next slide. The Copernicus Emergency Management Service supports all actors involved in the management of disasters by providing geospatial information to inform decision-making. In predicted events, the service immediately notifies users of their findings and can be activated on demand and offers to provide the users with maps, time series, or other relevant information to better manage disaster risk. So we have the rapid mapping activations, which provides geospatial information in the immediate aftermath of a disaster, and the risk and recovery mapping, which supplies information in support of disaster management activities, including prevention and preparedness. We find an increasing demand in activations over the northern and Arctic regions, especially for flooding and wildfires, which we will hear about later today. Then next slide. Out of the 3 branches of the Copernicus Security Service, the Copernicus Maritime Surveillance Service is the most polar relevant one. Only registered users can activate the service for maritime safety or marine pollution in polar regions. 2 examples of recent activations are monthly requests from the Icelandic Coast Guard for monitoring services for general law enforcement, maritime safety, maritime security, fisheries control, and customs, and routine services for general surveillance of maritime traffic and detections of oil spills off the coast of Greenland, requested by Danish authorities. And this is what we see in the illustration. Next slide. In addition to the Sentinels, the Copernicus space segment acquires data through the Copernicus contributing missions. This is mostly done upon request from the entrusted entities who operates the Copernicus services when it's needed for a product or service. One recent example is a contribution to the Copernicus marine operational ice products. A first evaluation of the ICE-I constellation to support operational ice products have been performed. This has provided input to high-resolution ice charts and mapping of individual iceberg positions. A new pilots to assess the usefulness of very high-resolution optical constellations are under development. Next slide. The Copernicus In-situ component provides data mostly for use by the Copernicus services, and some is also accessible for other users. The component manages related projects and research and development campaigns, such as the COINS project, which stands for Copernicus Observations in Situ Networking and Sustainability. One of the work packages is dedicated to Arctic data. The Copernicus In-situ coordination activity also prepared an Arctic project catalog of ongoing and former Arctic time-limited observation campaigns, mostly related to research. And the same group established a marine Arctic data portal with Arctic marine in-situ data easily accessible and freely available for any users. And you find the link in the presentation. There are several, next slide. There are several Horizon projects which are using Copernicus data for polar regions that are ongoing, and many of them will be presented during the workshop. We have the Kepler project, built around the European Ice Services to prepare a roadmap for Copernicus for an improved European capacity for monitoring and forecasting in the polar regions, which we will hear about tomorrow. And then we have the Arctic Passion project, which works to implement a coherent, integrated Arctic observing system, and we'll also have the Copernicus relevant parts of this presented tomorrow. Then ARCAS will be an early warning system providing continuous monitoring of the Arctic region, and we'll get some details about that later today. The Interus project focuses on integrating Arctic in-situ data, which will be fit for purpose for many Copernicus services. Then finally, we have the EU Polar Cluster, a network created to bring the insights from various areas of expertise together in order to provide one entry point to EU-funded polar research. And then the last slide, I just want to mention that we have a demonstration of an ocean data visualization tool, both for the Arctic and Antarctic from Siemens during the second coffee break today. Feel free to write any questions you might have in Slido. And over to you, Carlo, for the first thematic session of the workshop, Climate Change and Environmental Monitoring. Thank you very much.